Hello, I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Today I'll be speaking with Mr. John Herbst, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Hello, Mr. Herbst. Welcome to UATV.
My pleasure.
Despite recent reassurances from Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Tillerson, many in Kiev still fear that President Trump will sacrifice Ukraine in order to strike a grand bargain with Russia. Are these fears justified?
I understand the fears, and I don't think they can be completely ruled out. But I also believe that there are more and more reasons to think that such a deal, which sacrifices Ukraine and sacrifices American interests, will not happen.
There was a recent New York Times article yesterday about a Peace for Crimea lease plan involving a cast of shady and fairly random characters. It sparked fresh debate about unorthodox solutions to the Russian hybrid war in Ukraine. What influence do amateur diplomats have on White House foreign policy?
Well, according to that story, close associates of the president that predate his becoming the president are more involved in this. And of course, such folks would have access to the president, and such folks are amateurs in diplomacy. So this effort is kind of a joke, and fortunately it led nowhere, but it points to a danger. I believe that this danger is going to become smaller and smaller over time. You don't have a really functioning National Security Council right now at the White House. Hopefully, President Trump's appointment yesterday of General McMaster as the new NSC advisor will lead to the establishment of real order in the national security staff, so that all foreign policy matters are vetted by professionals before they go to the president. So I would look at this story yesterday as kind of an amusing one of something which did no real damage. And as long as we correct the procedures which permitted this to happen, it'll be fine.
Ukraine has been accused of openly siding with the Hillary Clinton camp during the 2016 election. What challenges does this present for Ukraine's ability to build bridges with the Trump White House, especially considering President Trump is known to hold grudges?
Look, I think the claim that the President Poroshenko sided with Hillary Clinton during the election is way overblown. I know for a fact that the president of Ukraine sought meetings with both candidate Clinton and candidate Trump. And he did see Ms. Clinton, he did not see Mr. Trump, but that was not his doing. And we know that President Trump had a relatively early phone call with President Poroshenko after the election, and that's a good thing. And it's clear that Secretary of Defense Mattis, CIA Director Pompeo, National Security Advisor McMaster, and even Secretary of State Tillerson have very realistic views about the dangers of Putin's foreign policy and the need to support Ukraine. And I suspect over time, this will shape this administration's policy.
Kremlin media has abruptly stopped its gushing coverage of the Trump presidency, and Russian officials are publicly downgrading their expectations for any breakthrough in bilateral relations. Did Moscow overestimate the impact of the Trump presidency?
I think it's pretty clear that the Kremlin wanted to see Trump win the presidency, although they did not necessarily expect that. I think that they had high hopes that Trump would find a way, without demanding Moscow's compliance with the Minsk agreements, to somehow ease sanctions. And I think they've witnessed how institutional pressures in Washington, I would say healthy institutional pressures in Washington, have grown over the past several weeks to make it harder for Mr. Trump to give away a major card to soothe and to gratify Mr. Putin.
In yesterday's New York Times article, you said that given Trump's praise of Putin, you fear the president might be too willing to mend relations with Putin at Ukraine's expense. Why does Trump urgently want to make peace with Putin's Russia?
That is a great mystery. President Trump has, in my judgment, projected an image of strength overall in foreign policy, which is a good thing. But somehow he's not projected that same sense of strength in dealing with the Kremlin. But then Washington is making it clear to him, and by that I mean the Congress, I mean his own advisors, are making clear to the president that that's not the way to negotiate successfully with Mr. Putin.
You have said that Putin is testing Trump. Do you think Trump really cares that Putin is testing him? Or do you think Trump is so desperately wants to make amends with Putin in Russia that he will allow Putin to more or less do what he wants?
I think that President Trump is ultimately interested in the success of his own administration. And once it becomes clear to him that appeasing the Kremlin is not going to make him a successful foreign policy president, he will adjust whatever thoughts he may have on that subject.
You've stated there is confusion at the top of the Trump administration. President Trump's remarks regarding Putin and the conflict in eastern Ukraine do not match those of other senior officials, including the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and the UN ambassador. Why is this, and why isn't there more uniformity regarding their policy toward Putin and Russia's actions?
Well, again, to be fair to the administration, most new presidents, when they arrive, take time to sort out their procedures, how they conduct policy. And so there's a certain amount of messiness in all new administrations. And we're seeing that here specifically on Russia policy. But again, he's put in place the right advisors. If he establishes an intelligent vetting process for decisions, I think we'll see good decisions coming. But so far, we have not seen that. Instead, we've seen this disorder, and we've seen this inclination to be weak where we really should be strong.
Yeah, going off that, you have written recently that the U.S. presidential administration has not been strong enough in its response to Russian aggression. What should the Trump administration be doing instead? What are the potential consequences of not taking a tougher, stronger approach against Putin's actions?
Look, Western leaders, not just American, essentially gave Putin a bye. They gave him a pass on his aggression in Georgia. As a result, we got the seizure of Crimea. The West reaction to Crimea was also very weak. As a result, we got the war in the Donbass. The Western reaction to Donbass was not strong enough by my judgment, but still much stronger than before. In late January, right after the phone call between Putin and Trump, the Russians seriously escalated the violence in eastern Ukraine. To this day, there's been no reaction from the President of the United States to that. That's a serious mistake. Fortunately, our ambassador to the UN, Haley, issued a tough response, but that was 4 days after the violence began. We need to have a clear understanding that the Kremlin was testing our administration with that violence in Ukraine's east, and our reaction was weak. We need to make sure that does not happen again.
You said Moscow believes it should control its neighbors and that they see the West as their adversary. Based on that, how can Ukraine, with the help of the West, really ever make peace with Putin's Russia?
Well, look, Ukraine has done a pretty good job, despite the relatively weak support from the West, in opposing Kremlin's aggression in the Donbass. You essentially have a stalemate. A stalemate is a result of two things. One, the Ukrainian people fought back, and the Ukrainian government organized that fighting back in competent ways. Secondly, you had some real support from the West, albeit not enough. And between Ukraine fighting back, the Western support, the Kremlin felt it had to limit its aggression. The aggression is real, it's large, but there's no full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia.
And my final question, you stated that if the Trump administration were to ease or lift sanctions against Russia, or try to at least, they would face serious political problems back here in Congress, the U.S. Congress. Could you explain that a bit more?
Well, you've had the Senate Majority Leader, very important man, Mitch McConnell, who's also a very quiet man in terms of challenging his own president, issue a statement a couple of weeks ago suggesting it would be a serious mistake to try and ease sanctions on the Kremlin as long as they're still fighting in Ukraine. Senator Cardin, a Democrat, said after that he believes they have a veto-proof majority in the Senate to maintain sanctions. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, also said about a week ago, a little bit longer passed, that it would be a serious mistake to ease sanctions. I believe that Congress would react strongly to prevent the Kremlin from giving Putin the gift of sanctions relief without serious Russian concessions in the war in Ukraine.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Herbst, for joining us today on UATV.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm Alex Gupta with UATV. Thank you.